welcome to Sundays at the Chateau, where today we have an extra special episode because I can finally reveal my mother's wedding to you that we hosted here last summer. I couldn't show you the photos before now because it was going to be seen on British television on Escape to the Chateau DIY, and it was shown last week. So now I am free to tell you all about it. I didn't want to spoil the surprise before, but I can show you the amazing photos that were taken by Michael Potts, my co-owner here at Lalande. He is an amazing photographer. I think that it was possibly the most magical day that I have ever experienced in this chateau, and that is really saying something. When my mother and her fiancé Percy told me that they would like to celebrate their big day here at Lalande, I have to admit that I had quite mixed emotions. On the one hand, I was delighted to help them celebrate their big day and to be able to welcome Percy formally into our family here in our home. But on the other hand, it was a huge responsibility. I wanted it to go perfectly. I'd never planned a wedding before. I didn't quite know where to start. And also, I'm sure that many children who've lost a parent will feel this. There's a slight feeling that maybe you're being dishonourable to the parent that you've lost by welcoming this new person into your home. And my father lived here at the chateau with me and he loved the chateau. But I know in my heart that my father would have been happy to see my mother happy and to see someone looking after her and his daughter. And although I know it sounds very strange to say this, I didn't just want to make Mummy and Percy happy, but I also wanted to make my father proud and to show him that he'd made a daughter strong enough to be able to move on in life and to be able to find happiness again and to be able to welcome new people into the family. And it's very important to me to share that side of the story with you because many of you will find yourselves in the same situation. You'll have lost parents that you love and have to welcome their new partners into your life. And I want to show you that that can be a very, very happy thing. If you allow yourself to open your heart to new people, then you can bring joy into your families again. As long as the person is worth it, of course. I mean, that wasn't too hard for me because Percy is such an extraordinary man. The second best man on the planet after only my father, it seems. So I don't know how my mother did it, but twice in a row she met someone extraordinary. So how did you and Percy meet?
I was on a plane traveling to Joburg. There was only a space left and I took it. Tiny little plane, 20 seaters. And Percy happens to be there. And it was a very shuddering plane. It was bumping. And Percy very correctly tried to ignore me absolutely. And his book was going like this. And I said to him, you know, I will not bother you. You don't have to pretend you can read. But I will not bother you, honestly. So he closed his book and he started talking. And I continued my journey. In the meantime, we had exchanged emails.
Unbelievable.
I know. And so it was quick. Stephanie one day saw me correspond.
I was looking at something on Mummy's iPad. She was showing me photos. And then a message popped up from Percy. She hadn't told me one word about him. And it started, "My dear lady." I was like, well, who on earth is this? Contacting my mother.
And I told her that it was somebody who had offered to take me next time I came back to South Africa to the cradle of mankind.
That's how he hooked her.
That's how he hooked
The cradle
her.
of mankind.
And so I explained to Stephanie, I will stop at his place for one night or two, and then he will take me to visit that place. And Stephanie said, absolutely not.
A complete stranger she'd met for 1 hour on an aeroplane.
But you can tell a lot about a person in 1 hour. She said, no, absolutely not. There's no question of you doing that. He will have to come and present himself here, by which time I was at the chateau. So, jokingly, I wrote to him what Stephanie had said. The next thing was, that's it, I've got a ticket and I'm coming on such a date.
And so Percy turned up at the chateau to see a woman that he'd met for an hour on an aeroplane a few months previously.
Well, Stephanie does not understand the urgency. At our age, we have to act fast.
And Mummy hadn't told him about the chateau.
No, I hadn't. No, of course not. I don't talk
So
about
he was completely shocked when he arrived.
He was rather, actually. He thought I lived in a farm because I mentioned the sheep and the hens.
And the rest is history. Having never planned a wedding before, I did not know where to start. So I thought I'd better start at the very beginning and find out what was the bride's vision for her perfect day. So when I first asked you, Mummy, what is your vision for the wedding? What did you say?
None.
See?
I am a simple person. I wanted it to be just the two of us, perhaps Stephanie if she had behaved, and that's all really.
Poor Mummy having a daughter like me.
I don't know where she comes from.
She wanted no fuss made because she said she was far too old to make a big fuss about things like this. Well, that's where we disagreed. Because I think that finding love should be celebrated at any age in life. It's miraculous. And I do not believe that anyone is too old to have the perfect wedding. So I decided that I was going to have to put the bride's wishes aside in this instance and to create a wedding in her image. Now, my mother would disagree with me on most of these points, but she is very flamboyant. She is very theatrical, but she's also extremely down to earth. And she loves nature, never happier than when gardening. So how to mix these disparate things together? What theme combines great theatricality with nature and love? And my mind immediately turned to A Midsummer Night's Dream. It seemed to me the perfect theme for my mother and for Lalande because this home is steeped in history. And it's in the middle of nature, it's in the heart of the French countryside, surrounded by woodland, and we wanted to use it to celebrate love. So I took A Midsummer Night's Dream as my theme and decided that it would be a very informal wedding and that it would be as close to nature throughout. The idea was to celebrate almost every part of it outside. Mummy wanted to start with a ceremony in the chapel. She was raised Catholic and it was important to her to use the chapel, and we found a local priest who agreed to come and perform the blessing, which was very, very important to both Mummy and Percy. But how was my mother going to get to the chapel? Now, admittedly, she could just have walked there because it's approximately 30 metres from the house. But that did not seem romantic or theatrical enough for Mummy and Percy's wedding. So I decided to take the opportunity to restore the carriage that has always been stored in our old stables. I doubt that it had been used for 100 years, and as far as I could tell, it had mainly been used as housing for mice in the last century. But Jerry and I wheeled it out and set about restoring it. Although it appeared to be a black carriage, when we started to clean it, we discovered that the primary layer of paint was in fact blue, so we wanted to repaint it blue as it would have been. As is often the case at Lalande, I come up with very grand ideas, but it would be quite impossible for me to see them through on my own. There's just too much to do. And I would not have managed to restore that carriage if it were not for my family, because Mummy's sister, my beautiful aunt who's also my godmother, and her husband, and my cousin and his girlfriend and their children all painted the carriage for me. Without this dream team, there would have been no romantic carriage ride for my mother on the day of her wedding. I took on the task of the upholstery of the cushions. They were in a dreadful state. I removed all traces of the mice, took off the horrible top fabric, steam cleaned them and hoovered them hundreds of times, and then covered them with a spectacular silk mix fabric. And then stepped in Lalande's magical floristry fairy, Marie, who many of you who've been following this vlog for months will know very well because she was here for months with us last year. And she is the most extraordinarily talented florist. So I gave her carte blanche with the flowers, and she made a spectacular floral display on the front of the carriage. And it felt so special that all of these people had come together to pool their resources and transform something. And when we stepped back, it was as though a fairy godmother had just waved her wand, and where once there had been a desolate pumpkin, There was now a spectacular carriage fit for a princess. In the end, were you happy that I forced you into some nice clothes on the day?
That was something else. Stephanie had to force me because I didn't want to be a bride in white. I'd done that once before.
So I picked out an outfit from Mummy's wardrobe that she already owned and which she looks beautiful in. I don't think anything could have been more perfect in the end.
And I was delighted not to have to buy another outfit.
It's a very beautiful brocade of gold and cream. So
Yes.
when you look at it closely, it's actually quite sumptuous. And for the evening, Mummy transformed, I think, into an even more spectacular outfit.
Yes.
This was the evening outfit. And yes, this is a dress that my mother already had, the dress on the inside, by
Yes.
Louis Ferraud. There's quite a story behind this dress because when my mother was very young, in her mid-40s, she had cancer. And in her usual inimitable style, she decided that until she was 5 years clear of cancer, it would be a waste of money for her to buy any clothing. So for 5 years, she didn't buy one stick of clothing in case she was about to pop off, and it would have been a waste of money. And at the end of the 5 years, she went to Bond Street to Louis Ferraud and bought a couple of outfits, one of which was this dress. And then I had the most extraordinary find. I went to the sale of the clothing of a man called Reinhard Luthier, who was one of the co-founders of the couture house Azzaro, and he was selling all of his collection of clothes just in a village down the road. And he had this exquisite carven haute couture evening jacket, which is so beautiful, and I knew it would fit my mother perfectly. And look how it's as though the two were made to go together. And because it's haute couture, every single bead on this was hand sewn, every bead. You
It's
truly
really
were a
lovely.
princess.
Yes, finally.
She was born for this moment. Stepping into the carriage, waving to her subjects as she went past. You would have thought she'd been doing it every day as a full-time job. It melted my heart to see her look so beautiful. We decided to keep the decoration of the chapel very simple because the chapel really is magnificent and speaks for itself. But I did want to bring nature into it to have that mix. So our trusty photographer, Michael Potts, cut lots of little saplings down in the woods, and he and Scottman brought them into the chapel, and it looked magnificent. It really, truly looked magical. There was one small problem, which is that the trees were so big that the priest wouldn't have been able to see the bride and groom. So we kept them in the chapel, but we moved them towards the back, away from the altar. So they were behind the congregation. To that, Marie added some very simple vases of lilies on the altar itself, and we felt that that was enough. It was a very light touch, but we brought nature into the chapel and allowed the historical decoration of the chapel to shine. We all sang Amazing Grace as Mummy and Percy walked into the church. I also sang Ave Maria during the ceremony. The priest gave a magnificent sermon, and it was one of those extraordinary coincidences in life that gave me goosebumps, because not knowing what our theme had been, he gave a sermon about the beauty of nature and mentioned how wonderful it was to see the trees in the church. So everything tied together in this unexpected way. When Mummy and Percy walked out of the church, they were showered in rose petals by all their loved ones, and then we all walked through the chateau to the main courtyard. And there, as we always do for our biggest celebrations, we had turned the fountain into a giant champagne cooler. And I'd wanted to keep the sense of informality, so I'd moved lots of furniture from the house outside, and there were rugs on the floor and cushions for people to recline, trays of food on the tables. We continued the theme of bringing nature in by bringing more saplings from the forest and putting them in the courtyard, so there were little trees amidst the furniture. And beforehand I'd bought parasols to give an exotic touch, and just in case it was very, very hot, which it was, so it was lucky that I had them. But they surpassed my wildest expectations when I glanced over across the courtyard to see my mother reclining on a rug on the floor against a cushion under a parasol with Percy feeding her titbits. That to me is the image of their wedding. As if it's possible to be too old for romance. Complete nonsense. Whilst we were in the main courtyard, there was the cutting of the cake. Now, the cake was also one of my responsibilities, and not one that I passed with flying colours. I'd never made a wedding cake before, and it was lopsided. It was the Leaning Tower of cakes. And if it hadn't been for Marie's magical floristry over it, it would have been a disaster. But I think that the roses managed to distract from the cake's jaunty angle. One of my favourite photos of the wedding is of Mummy and Percy about to cut the cake, with Jerry standing behind them holding a parasol because it was so warm, looking resplendent in tartan. Another perfect Lalande shot. After the afternoon party in the courtyard, we decided that it would be very nice, as we were lucky enough to be in our own home, to schedule a 2-hour break for everyone to go and have a little nap, get changed into their evening clothes and prepare for dinner. I raced to the kitchen because I was in charge of cooking the 6-course meal, and luckily my friend Dana came to help me. So the two of us were cooking up a storm in the kitchen whilst a lot of family members raced onto the terrace to transform it for the evening. In terms of our preparations for this wedding, there were many spectacular transformations. The chapel being cleaned and filled with trees and foliage, the carriage being brought back to life. But of all of them, I think our transformation of the terrace was the most spectacular one. We were very lucky to have this amazing volunteer staying with us from Australia called Grant. And I was saying that I wished we had some sort of structure on the terrace that we could hang flowers and leaves from. And he said, well, no problem. I can build a pergola. So we sat together and designed something. I really didn't think this was going to be possible, especially in the time frame we had. But he set to work and he did not stop until he'd created a huge pergola covering most of our terrace. Once the pergola was up, we started decorating it. Marie and I had spent the weeks leading up to the wedding every weekend going to all of the local charity shops and buying all the lace curtains that we could find. We ended up with hundreds of meters of old lace curtains, and we used them to create a top on the pergola so that the sun was dappled through the lace, creating a beautiful pattern on the table and on the floor. Then below that, Marie started hanging branches that she'd collected from all over the 60 acres of land that Lalande is on. The pergola itself we completely covered with thousands of tiny fairy lights that we would be able to turn on at the last moment. And then I went on eBay and found a beautiful pair of French antique chandeliers. I couldn't have them wired because I didn't want them to stay outside all of the time, but we filled them with the fairy lights that would be turned on in the evening. And in the centre, we hung a bird cage also filled with fairy lights. I bought little boxes that were supposed to be for wedding favours, but instead of using them for that, I filled them with little LED tea lights that we could just turn on at the beginning of the evening, and they were suspended from the pergola amidst all of the branches that were coming down. We set up lots of tables underneath, covered with pink fabric and lace on top to continue the theme of the lace. And then I had to think, what were we going to use for the plates? I didn't have 30 matching plates, so I considered buying a matching set for my mother's wedding, but it would have been a huge expense, and I realised that I actually didn't want that look. I was going for something far more whimsical, far more fairy tale, and I thought it would be more beautiful to use the very finest French porcelain, but totally mismatched. And so we used all of my different sets and interspersed them around the table, and then we used gold cutlery to add even more bling and pink glasses mixed in with the crystal. But it would not have been complete without the final touch, which once again was Marie arriving with the flowers. And she covered the table in roses. During our charity shop raids, whilst we were looking for all of the lace for the pergola, I had been buying all of the old crystal and glass ice buckets that I could find. Any ice bucket. I just kept buying them. Everybody in the house thought that I was mad. But Marie loved the idea, and she put wire frames in them and used them for all of the floral displays along the table. And I think that Marie's floral design for that table is perhaps the most beautiful I have ever seen. Her talent is extraordinary. As the sun set on the most perfect day that we had ever had here at this chateau, the fairy lights on the terrace started to sparkle and twinkle, and it was as though we had been transported to fairyland. I'm actually getting goosebumps thinking about it now. That is how beautiful it was. And I'm so happy to be able to show you these photos and to be able to share some of the emotions that I have about that day with you. It was a celebration of love. It was a lesson that we can find love at any age in life. And it was a symbol of what people can achieve when they come together from all over the world and help each other. Percy's family, who flew all the way from South Africa, cooked all of the meals around the day of the wedding to free me up to be able to focus on the planning for the day itself. My family completely transformed the carriage. They laid the most spectacular table. They brought all of the wine. Percy provided the champagne. Grant from Australia built the heavenly pergola. And Marie from Norway created the most stunning floral displays. All of these people were key in making this event possible, and that's what I love about chateau life at Lalande. It's always about community, and it's always about all of us coming together to create something greater than ourselves. And as so many of you have been asking me how Marie is getting on, here's a little update from her.
Hello, how are you? I am very good. I'm enjoying my morning coffee and just being at home. As some of you know, I live in Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. As many are now, I'm at home, which is incredibly strange, but it's also quite lovely because I can do all the things I've been wanting to do for ages, and I'm picking blossoms and florals from the garden, which is amazing, so I can practice my skills and show you lots of florals, which I do on my Instagram, so I'm sure Stephanie will add my link somewhere and you can have a look. It's my favourite season, spring. Staying positive, this will pass as well, it won't be forever, and sooner rather than later I'll be back at Lalande drinking rosé. Take care and stay safe. Bye!
Yay, Marie's going to come back to Lalande when she can. I cannot wait. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Mummy and Percy's magical wedding. And before I go today, I have a very big announcement to make, because Michael Petherick, whom you probably know from his Chateau channel, Doing It Ourselves, and if you don't, go and check it out because it's incredible. He and I are planning a joint venture, which we would have started already if it hadn't been for the French lockdown. But we're too excited to keep it under wraps, so we're going to tell you about it anyway. As soon as the lockdown has ended, we are going to start a new series, as well as our current videos. Don't worry, this is an extra, not instead of. We'll be travelling around France and visiting chateaux, staying in them, meeting the châtelaines, telling you the history of the buildings, the history of the families who've lived there, showcasing some of the architectural highlights and some of the extraordinary furniture in them. We already have the first couple planned, but we'll be looking for many more chateaux to feature. So if you own a chateau and you think we should come and visit you, or if you know of a chateau that you think we should visit, please contact us and let us know. We want to bring all of the chateaux of France to you and reveal the beauty and the history of this magnificent country. And let's face it, we're also going to have a lot of fun together. Michael, I can't wait.
Hi Steph, hello everyone. Welcome to Chateau de Lalande. I'm also really excited to announce this project. Stephanie has forgot to mention one thing, and that is we're not just going to be seeing chateaux that are already renovated. We're going to be showing you chateaux that are for sale and showing you what's available, how much you can get it for. We'll give you our expertise because we've been doing up chateaux for quite a few years now. We know what it takes and we know what costs money. We're going to do it. We're going to do it in style. We're going to have to get a little vintage convertible with a picnic camper on the back and fly through the French countryside vintage style. So back to Steph.
I cannot wait to share it with you. As always, I want to end by thanking my patrons who are making this vlog possible. Without you, I would be in a bundle of stress worrying about my bills because our bed and breakfast business is closed for the year because of coronavirus. I do not know how I would have made it through the season, but instead of spending my entire time on the phone to my bank manager, I am able to get on with making these videos and celebrating chateau life, celebrating French history with you all, and that is because of you. And it's because of all of the people who watch my vlogs and watch the adverts. You all help to keep this chateau alive and this channel alive. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And David, thank you for finding that replacement cup for my mother. She is so delighted. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. See you in the next vlog. Bye from Lalande. A huge thank you to all of our patrons at Lalande who are making this vlog possible, especially our Marquise and Marquise of Lalande, Daniela, Laura de Murray, Caroline Forster, Brenda Gibbons, Maureen Palmer, Brian Woodward and David Young. And thank you to all of you.